I'm with Owaissa Heimann, Peggy Clay, and I'm Jacqueline Virginia from Oklahoma State University. So Owaissa, could you tell me when and where you were born?
I was born at Caprock, New Mexico in 1926, February 1926.
Could you tell me how your family got there?
Actually, my mother and daddy had homesteaded in Lee County back in 1915, and they had a ranch, and we had a ranch with some farming back then in dryland farming, and we had sheep and cows.
Okay, so could you tell me a little bit about what it was like when you were growing up? What did you do on the ranch?
Well, I would say I really I had 3 older brothers, and so consequently when I worked more in the house more than I did outside per se. And of course we had sheep and I bottled doggies and that kind of thing, but I was not the outside girl because I helped mother on the inside. I cleaned the house and helped cook when I got older. And I went to school in Tatum, and I graduated from Tatum High School.
So how far away was your school growing up?
We lived 25 miles from Tatum, and that did not include the bus route.
How long was your bus route?
Probably in the vicinity of 40 to 50 miles.
Okay. So you worked mostly inside. When did you start your chores? Did you get up and work on chores before you went to school, or?
No.
So it was when you got home?
No, because I didn't. Because I had older brothers, I didn't do that. I worked inside.
And what did you guys do for fun growing up?
Well, actually, then, of course, there was no TV. I can remember when we got radios. We played games. We did all kinds of games like 42 and dominoes and checkers, anything, because the family did things by doing things together because there was no outside per se. And, of course, in high school and all, of course, I participated in sports and that sort of thing. But, of course, I grew up. I ended up, of course, it's in the war. Actually, World War II was declared when I was in high school.
Okay.
And they drafted my 3 older brothers. And so mother and dad, and then I have a younger brother, and of course we were left at home. And then when I graduated from high school, I went to school at Portales, Eastern New Mexico State University. And because it was closer to home, and at that time gas was rationed as well as tires.
Okay, so we'll get to World War II, but we'll step back a minute. Did the Dust Bowl affect your family at all?
Yes, of course, my daddy at that time, he freighted when they homesteaded in Lincoln. Of course, then they had teams of horses, and they actually Fresnoed and helped build roads and stuff as a supplement to the living.
Was that through WPA?
Well, on building the roads, I don't know, because we didn't qualify in that particular deal. But of course, mother always raised a garden, and mother tanned and done. So, as far as provider, we probably as a whole had more than some around us, not quite as much as others, but but actually mother and daddy, by then, of course, they had moved and bought territory more and done, since they, had married and homesteaded there, and they moved down and bought another piece of property, and then they gradually bought more and more throughout the years.
Do you remember any dust storms or anything like that?
I can only remember my mother talking about the dust storms in this area, because you could see the dirt in the air from where we lived to the clouds. But we had drought. My daddy took the cattle and the sheep and moved to wheat fields up around above out of San Juan and up above on top of the Caprock, and went to wheat and the like, and kept the cattle there. And I can remember the folks talking and doing, and say like we called it bear grass here, they called it soapweed. But anyway, of course I can remember the folks talking about burning off the ends of it and feeding the livestock and that sort of thing. But Daddy moved up and camped out, had a tent, and he stayed with the cattle up there, and mother stayed home and done, and of course the family stayed there.
Did they tell you any stories? Did your mom ever tell you any stories or complain about having to clean?
We didn't you know, we didn't have the dirt was more in this area
Yeah.
and partly down because we did not have the farming. Now, we had dry land. We had a field, all right. Daddy raised sorghum, and, of course, in the garden raised corn and things. His mother always had a big garden and done things like that. But, no, we didn't.
Okay. So you mentioned that your mother canned. What kinds of things did she can? Or
Mother canned lots of vegetables. We also had fruit trees, and Mother canned fruit. We got like peaches and apples and cherries, and the like. And Mother always had a big garden. That was one time that, and I can remember Daddy plowing it then.
Mm-hmm.
We did not have tractors at that time,
Mm-hmm.
and he always had the plow, and he plowed with a horse. And that was his day to stay home to take care of it.
So how close was the closest grocery store?
There was a small, Caprock had a small grocery store and post office, service station and that kind of thing, 25 miles from anywhere else. And actually we were 50 miles from Roswell,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where we did major trading, but we went to school in Tatum, which was 25 miles away.
Mm-hmm. How often would you go into Roswell?
They probably, then most people went on weekends.
Mm-hmm.
And then of course Tatum had grocery store. In fact, when my mother drove a car, the bus from where we lived, when they started the bus, Mother started and drove the bus in. And the Bilderbacks owned, then it was a whole general store. It had clothing, groceries, whatever, you know. And Mother worked in that in the daytime, and then she went back home with the bus. We probably were the end of the route because most of them were between us and town.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned your father, he had other jobs too?
Not outside the ranch,
Okay.
no.
So-
Other than he helped build roads because then there was no pavement,
Okay.
and they helped build roads, and they did it by Fresnos and teams of horses.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So then your school, could you tell me a bit more about your school? How big was it?
Well, it was 12-year high school. Only one around for 25 miles down the road. Because Lovington would have been the closest in that direction. Actually, full-time, probably in my class, I think there was 17 of us graduated.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a large rural community which took in, like from Tatum, you could go towards Texas, which was Bronco, and then or you went towards Crossroads, which was 25 more miles that direction, and they bused from that direction, and then the Caprock area bused in, and then of course they had a McDonald's, and there was a small school that was not real far from us, but it was in the next county. We did not go to that school.
Mm-hmm. Was it were all the grades in one building, or you had a separate high school?
Well, ours we had individual classrooms.
Okay.
We had a regular school, and had an auditorium and a gym and the whole thing. As far as the school is concerned, the one that was out close to us would have been all a small grade school, but I did not go. I went to a school that was 12 years all my life.
When did your family get a telephone?
Well, they had rural telephones that went over the fence lines at one time. You had neighbors and you had rings. And I don't know. I would have probably been in high school.
Okay.
I graduated from high school in 1943.
Okay. So could you tell me a bit about high school? What did you do for fun?
Well, we played games,
Mm-hmm.
mainly baseball and volleyball and basketball. And, of course, we had proms and all just like any other school as far as that's concerned.
Now, you mentioned the year that you graduated was the year World War II started.
Well, see, World started in 41.
Okay,
I
it started
graduated in 43.
Okay. So could you tell me how that impacted your kind of that time period for you? Because high school is it had to have affected your community.
Well, they drafted all the older boys, and then what happened at the time, the boys were, if they didn't want to be drafted, which they knew that was going to happen,
Mm-hmm.
then they would join whatever branch of service, and a lot of them joined whatever branch they wanted to join before the end of school in order they would not be drafted.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, it and it did affect as far as the workforce is concerned, because my oldest brother at that time, he worked as a butcher in this grocery store that was in Tatum and Dunn, and they deferred him one time because the owner, they'd had an explosion and burned his hands. And so in order to service the grocery store, then they deferred Burl, which meant that he missed the death march in Bataan. Because otherwise those that went from our area at that draft call, he would have been in, but he missed it.
Wow.
But all three served in the service, and all three seen combat.
Wow.
One brother was in the tank destroyers, and he fought Rommel across Africa and into Italy, and they were at the top of Italy when the war was over. And another brother went to France, and he was in the Battle of the Bulge, and it snowed, and he said the only reason the Germans didn't capture them was because they covered them with snow. And in the battle, it killed each soldier on each side of him, and he was wounded, but he would come home. And then the other brother went to Hawaii and sat there until they invaded the islands. And then he was in, when they invaded Iwo Jima, then he was in that invasion.
Okay. So how did because your brothers helped your father with the ranch, so what did your father do during that time period?
Well, they sold down livestock because they weren't able to take care of what was there. Because all the extra help had all been drafted. And when they drafted my last brother, which is 4 years older than me, then the folks lost their help.
I'd imagine a lot of people in the community were sort of in the same boat, and that there wasn't a lot of male help.
There wasn't, because everybody was drafted. I mean, anybody that was eligible or whatsoever, and like some cases they might leave somebody at home, but they didn't with my folks. They took all three.
So how would that have affected the entire ranching community? I mean, did everybody downsize?
They would have had to downsize. Because, and if they were, of course the folks had more than others, but not as much as some, of course.
Right.
But they had to downsize because we had sheep barns, and we always had sheep. Mother loved sheep and done, and we had big sheep barns, and we crowded at night when they lambed and done that kind of thing. But it's just like anything else. I mean, they didn't have the help, so.
Did you and your mom start helping your father more outside?
Mother always helped outside. I did not. I was in school.
Okay. So back to school. So you graduated in 43. Could you tell me how and when you met your husband?
I met him after I went to college, graduated from Eastern. I happened to be the first four-year home economics graduate because it was a two-year school.
Okay.
And when I was a sophomore, they made it a four-year home economics school. And the home economics teacher, Miss Safri, had an apartment, and we girls that were in home economics lived and done within the program that you did with home economics. And so I came up here. There were 4 agents, 2 adult and 2 4-H, and I came as the new 4-H home economist in the county, the first that came in to work. Vance Lusk was working when I came as the 4-H agent. He had come in June, and I came in January. And through Extension and through here, of course, actually NC, my first husband, and Vance ran together. And Vance and I worked together. And when I came to work, I did not even have a car, and that you have to have, and it was in the period of time that I guess you would call it black market cars, when the dealers couldn't get the cars, but the other individuals could get cars. And so I bought a little 5-passenger Ford Coupe. Originally, at that time, 1948, it cost $1,700 through the Ford dealer, but I had to pay $2,400 to get it through the black deal. And of course, they had a car lot
Yeah.
extra, and they done, and I bought that from him. And of course, I came to work. My very first job, I worked all the time I was in college and made my expenses. And because I worked in the dining hall, and then I also graded papers for the home economics teacher and kept the home ec department because I had good enough grades to hold down good jobs.
So could you tell me why you decided to go into home economics in college?
Well, that's just what I like to do. And then when I was in college, at that time we were home demonstration agents, and Winnie Poole was the agent in Roosevelt County, which is where Portales is, and she came and talked to the home economics class, and that's what I decided I would go into extension, and I applied. I rode the bus to be interviewed, and well, actually, Foster and I had applied for the job, and Foster and Fern, the two adult agents, came to Portales and interviewed me, and so when they got through interviewing me, I was to go to Union County. I had been offered other counties, but then they decided I would come to Union, so that's what I did.
Okay, so you came here in 1948. So could you tell me what Clayton was like in 1948?
Well, it was the whole county was more thickly populated. We had 4-H clubs. Some met at night. Most of them met in the schools because we had a lot more schools in than we do now. We had 10 schools, 10 4-H clubs. And most of the clubs, like when we went to Amistad, we met in the afternoon, and we had the whole afternoon for 4-H.
Oh.
And we met and done. We went out for lunch, ate and done, and then we stayed. The only school, and we met at Des Moines, Folsom, all of those we met, Grenville, we met during school time. Because your home economics, you had 4-H, and the ag agents, all of you have agriculture or home economics degrees to do the program. You're classified off-campus teachers of New Mexico State University, same as a home ec teacher in high school, or same as an ag teacher.
Interesting.
Is what Extension did, and they worked with rural people because at that time people were at home and the homemakers, and that's why there were so many clubs, because each had all their communities they met on. For instance, I'm going to say at Amistad, there was an Amistad, there was a Hayden, and there was a Centerville and an Allen Rosebud Club in that lower part of the county because of the variation in where people live, the distance, and the like. And so at that time, of course, there was 4 of us, and Aubrey did adult work, and I did 4-H, and of course, I trained under Aubrey to do because I personally could not have had a better instructor on what to do. And she incorporated me into the adult clubs as well as doing the 4-H clubs, and of course, we helped each other. And that was the purpose. When they put the 4-H agents in, then you picked up the 4-H program that the adult agent had been doing, and so they become strictly the women's club or the ag, and then we picked up the 4-H, and then of course all 4 agents worked together, and we had big clubs. At one time there was over 300 women involved in extension clubs.
Wow, in Union County.
In Union County.
When would you say that was?
48, 49, the 50s,
So,
and up into the 60s even. In fact, I went back and, believe it or not, we have complete history of all the agents that have served in this county and when they served. We know, I also have the original minutes when Esther Call was the agent at that time when she organized what they call the Women's Council, which is made up of all the clubs in the county, and they help govern extension programs. And we know how clubs were added, and when Aubrey she organized some additional clubs. Some of the older clubs dropped out. We organized different. I organized those girls were older 4-H girls that married and were here, and so they didn't fit in one club because they were older women and per se. So I organized a group of all of the ones that were originally 4-H kids, and they called themselves the Frantic Mothers, and that really was the gospel truth. And I said, we tried all kinds of times. We did mornings, we did afternoons, we did all kinds of things because of maybe the age of the kids, you know, and nap time and that sort of thing. And so, but those young gals that, like I say, that's what they named themselves,
Good name.
the Frantic Mothers. And they stayed in fact, after my daughter came back from Lee County and served as the agent, then they organized, but then there's some members that came in that wanted to make it like a sorority, and that did not work. It's because that was the purpose of extension. But yeah, and so, you know, gradually the older clubs dropped out because the population went away. And but we used to take as high as 25 kids and more to state contests and stuff, and we were, careful to say it, we were an outstanding county. And it came because of 4-H leaders and the training that we could give them. In fact, I had 4-H women that in making clothing schools and food schools and things. Basically, as we changed, particularly when we became a 2-agent county and not a 4-agent county.
When did that happen?
Oh, I don't know exactly.
Decade even?
Because when Kay Heffley went out and A.T. Broadwell was 4-H agents, A.T. went back to get his master's, and Kay married and lived in Texline. And so, I don't know. It's been a variety. It's been a long time. But when we became 2-agents, so because they were used to having an agent meet adult clubs and an agent meet 4-H clubs, and when you got one agent doing 2 jobs, there has to be something that gives.
Sure.
So first time I met, when Audrey moved to a different county, I became at that time I did not pick up the adult work. I stayed with 4-H, and Mabel Hanger came from Missouri. She had a friend, her agent, the agent friend was in Quake County in Tucumcari. And so Mabel came, but a year and a half later she had a stroke and passed away.
Oh, wow.
And so after that, then I picked up the adult program and the 4-H program. And particularly the adult clubs was, should I say, they were used to agent meeting. So if I had a women's club, I might meet them in the morning. I met like at Amistad, I'll say, they had a women's club and a 4-H club. So I met that club in the morning, I met 4-H in the afternoon, and I might have another meeting that night. And I was making, I had 2 daughters.
Wow.
I was making 29 meetings a month.
Wow. That's a lot of
And I
meetings.
still did not keep everybody happy. So, because the clubs that didn't have 4-H clubs, they couldn't understand why you didn't spend the whole day with them like you had done before.
Right.
So, when we got another agent, and this happened twice, Gene Huck worked and Kay worked, Kay Glenn, Kay Heffley now. So when we knew the funding was no longer there for our 4 agents, then I actually ended up meeting with all the officers of the women's extension clubs and also the leaders in 4-H clubs. And I said, we have to arrive at some sort of situation that makes this work. So we decided on what months I met adult and what months I met 4-H. And that doesn't mean that you didn't do both jobs in 1 month, but your major deal, you met like the women's club, and you might do a training school for the 4-H leaders. And then the next month you would meet maybe 4-H, and then you did training. So you developed leadership within both groups. And because of the way we handled the clothing program, we actually had workshops, and they actually took projects and worked basically what we planned programs, and kids knew they were due so much every month to get their project work done. And so the leaders were trained to do exactly what the kids were supposed to do in their variety of projects that month, particularly clothing. And then the next month, they were trained to do the next until we build on it and build on it until after we trained it all the particular project areas, and we picked up specific things like hems and zippers and sleeves and seam finishes. We did specific things because then you had kids that maybe sewed 8 years, and then we have contests between the different age levels.
Nice. So one thing you said was the purpose of extension. Could you say in your own words what the purpose of extension is?
The purpose is to teach and to work with all the people that are interested in bettering their lives in home economics and agriculture. And that's done a lot. Mainly our show window is 4-H.
Okay.
And so with 4-H and the program developed and the like, because we had lots of kids, we had some leaders. In fact, I would say Mary Alice Copeland at Amistad, when I first started, did things, and this Amistad sort of done things a little differently, and some of those things we incorporated into other programs, and some of those things became countywide because of either planning programs and as far as demonstrations are concerned, kids knew how to give demonstrations. We taught, we done what made up a demonstration, what the posters are done, and how you do, and what makes a demonstration, and how you begin it, and we call it the middle, and how you summarize.
So you mentioned some of the things you did with the kids, but what are the types of things you did with the women?
Mainly home economics, mainly like with various types of clothing. In fact, at one time we did, there was a lady with J.C. Penney. They taught class, and they had college classes, and our clothing specialist out of New Mexico State University taught. And what we did, we trained women how to do cotton dresses with various techniques. They learned how to do best dresses with various techniques like lining and underlining and those kind of things, and then they made coats. And from that we did fashion show, and the ladies model, they got certificates. It was bishop technique, and it had to do with organizing and making your deal. But you had all kinds of things. You had home economics, you had like clothing, or you might have foods, you might have home management, any type of thing. And actually, in doing the women's program, the women turn in ideas on what they would like to have the next year, and every lady had that right. And from that list was compiled, and then the membership voted on it, and you had a yearbook committee that went in and decided, and it was decided what months would be what programs, and particularly, like I say, whether you meant the clubs or if it was leader training. So it's an educational deal. It was originally started Extension started in 1916.
Wow.
And so it was started to help the rural people because they didn't have the travel,
Right.
Everything was done by small communities at that time because they only traveled so far. Roads made a difference.
Right.
When I came to the county, the only road paved was going to Raton, and like if you went south towards Owaissa and Amistad, and like that road was not paved. And it wasn't paved part of the road was paved going to Gladstone towards Colfax County.
Wow.
It was paved on each end, but not in the middle.
That's funny.
They did it by money, and so, and sort of south. I mean, it was done that way. When they built.
Sure.
But it's the world's changed.
Yeah. So how? I mean, you just mentioned the world's changed, but it sounds like these women's groups must have been really important to helping bring about some of those changes too.
Yeah, the women's programs, and I might also tell you, and Peggy probably remembers this too, At the time, they did not know I was expecting my first child. We were having the state extension meeting here that year. And if you don't think women can get things done, just buck them a little bit. And somebody finds out that. What I'm saying is that because they had 2 agents that were not doing their job, they made the ruling out in New Mexico State that you could not work if you had a baby. And so in the process, my Women's Extension Council, particularly officers, decided one gentleman that was in charge was making no progress. And of course, again, the others had to go out accordingly. And so they got unhappy and they called in the dean of New Mexico State University and they had a meeting with him. And he called me down to the hotel the night before and said, you can go to work anytime you want to. And so the ladies had their guns all loaded and ready to do, and he just read their comments, I'm sure. I did not go to the meeting. But knowing the ladies that I could tell that did it, yes. And I said it was so funny because they had lunch all prepared. I mean, they were going to Mrs. Obeater's and had lunch all fixed. Was taking care of the dean. And so anyway, they had their little meeting and they done, and then they took him to lunch and he didn't forget that.
Wow.
And so I went back to work. But the other 2 didn't go back to work because my women wanted me back.
So before you got here, was there a women's extension?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yes, there's been women's clubs in this county. Well, like I say, since 16 and off and on. And actually, Esther called when she worked in a variety of those clubs were there. And again, extension is funded by county, state, and federal money. And when you lose, it's supposed to be third, but that doesn't always occur. And when the county put up additional money to put into other agents, but again, our county lost 2 of the natural gas things within the county, which lost revenue. Colorado Interstate, and what they did, they just moved over across the line, and they moved, and New Mexico and the county lost all that revenue.
Right.
It also affects the railroad. Also affects, and at one time with the feedlots, and that's made a difference in this county when we lost the 2 of the best feedlots.
Yep.
Which the income from that, I know Jack Buck managed this feedlot out here at the edge of town, and I happen to belong to Cowbells, and we're an educational beef organization. And so consequently, he told, what the feedlot as far as the revenue and what it brings in for the thousands of dollars. And when you lose all of that, it affects your tax base.
Sure.
And so it's made a tremendous difference in this county.
So getting into the 50s, do you remember the drought of the 1950s?
Yes, my first husband was an order buyer, and then we had cattle too on the side, and but I wasn't that directly involved other than the ranch. And I can remember when prices went down to nothing. I think they bought 17 cents a pound at one time.
Wow. So did that change when you were doing extension? Did you sort of adapt to that in terms of trying to help people deal better with the drought, or?
Well, yes, we did what programs that we could do that the women requested and like, and then of course we did additional programs with, like the food-based program. I can't think what to call it now, but with the commodities for those kind of things, we also did training with those people, like when they got dry eggs and things that we were required to work with them in relation to educating them what to do with the products that they were getting.
So how many years did you do extension? Or are you still doing extension?
I actually was employed 39 years.
But you're still kind of involved with extension. Yes. So how important do you think extension is to this county?
I think it's very important. Actually, as far as socialization and education, I realize they can do, but you know, there's other things. And of course, some people do more crafts than others, and some clubs do that way. But as a whole, back when we were only allowed to do one craft, we were not a craft club. We were an education. Of course, that's still educational.
Sure.
But it's not the same thing. It's
Right.
not the subject matter. You know.
Yeah. So how has extension changed in that time period?
Mainly because I don't know that we were extension lost in the 50s as much as later on.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, a lot of the older people passed away, and the youngers were not there except in certain areas.
Mm-hmm.
And so extension clubs have changed. And again, it's like I said, like with Frantic Mothers, sometimes when you get members in that cause problems, like they wanted, she was more prone to make it a sorority. Well, that wasn't the purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And so it dropped. It went bye-bye. But, you know, but it is an important part. And of course, we in the home economics field tried to, because at that, when Owaissa retired, the home economist, of course, they had frozen the county agent's position. So what they could do is they let them hire what we call a program assistant, and there's been more than one in that capacity, because I thought she was the only agent in the county, but she's a home economist and not an ag person. And so they could hire some that would work with that. Some worked with what we call the ethnic program, which is nutrition for people. And then in Owaissa's final years in being the agent, the home economist, and then actually the girl had her ag degree and worked as a program assistant. But because extension now requires you to have your master's in New Mexico when you start, and that program assistant had her ag degree but not the master's degree, and so she could not be hired as the county agent, because what they did when the home economist retired, then she applied for the job in Boise City.
Mm-hmm.
And so she moved, and that made a complete change there. So, and then extension, should I say, put the home economics position on. Personally, I wonder if it'll ever come back. And they opened up the ag position.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's been a real drastic change made there.
Mm-hmm.
And they still have a program assistant, but she's new. And she's been through 4-H, and she does have her ag degree. But they both happen to be ag, no home economics.
Okay. So when would you say there was the most people involved in extension, like the most women in women's groups?
Oh, well, I'd say at least through the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like some have dropped, and then we added clubs. Because, again, clientele's changed.
Mm-hmm.
The county is a big county. It's 50 miles wide and over 100 miles long. And even though it sits pretty well in it really is centrally within the county. Because if you go north, you go west, or you go south, it's about 45, 50 miles. But also the people have different shopping habits.
Mm-hmm.
So the northern people do not come this direction. They go towards Raton, Trinidad, or Pueblos.
Mm-hmm.
Southern people do, but they also are acclimated to in the Dalhart area or the Tuncumcari area because they're just as close.
Sure.
So you have people that come, and you even have people that come from Hardin County here to buy groceries because they don't do. So they either got to come here to buy groceries, or they got to go to Tuncumcari.
Mm-hmm.
So it depends where they live in the county.
Right.
Same thing is the people that go towards Gladstone or Springer, that direction. Those people again, and where their kids go to school makes a difference.
Mm-hmm.
And that's made a drastic change in this county.
Okay.
So when you only have 2 high schools left, and then you move the southern area out to Quake County or Logan because of the situation and the distance and the school system. So if they're going to go to their kids, they're going to go in that direction.
Right, that makes sense.
It just makes a difference.
So, as someone who's been working in this county and Cimarron County, a common complaint on both sides is that downstate or doesn't seem to care about us that much or doesn't come out here much. But as your experience with the extension agency, that's with the state university.
Sort of the same thing. I think it's more now than what it used to be per se, except they only learned how far we were from the state office when they had to come up here.
And how far?
How far each way? Because I can remember going to Chris's like 5 times in a year, depending on annual conference, if you served on committees, 4-H contest, and and they had in-service training. We used to go in for in-service training in home economics and in 4-H, and of course part of that back used to. I think there's a difference in the specialist in the state office completely now from what they used to be, because you could get specialists to come to the county to help teach, and we had some extra food and clothing specialists, and we had a good home management specialist. I don't see that now. I don't see their willingness to share and do it, because they used to divide us in districts, and they would come and train agents in certain subjects by districts, and so we'd go in either like to Vegas or Santa Fe or whatever and done, and then they do certain programs within their fields, and then we would come back and present it as a part of the possible program for the ladies and the like. And then, of course, even we used to have we had one food specialist that was particularly good in training people to judge, and to judge canning, to judge baking. We trained them to judge at county fairs at one time, and the specialist helped do that. And as you do and you learn, so, and of course, the counties up here, actually, Colfax County, Hardin County, and Union County, I would say we used to do some things together because we are more isolated. We're sort of like the edge of Oklahoma.
Yeah.
We're a long way. We're over 400 miles
Sure.
from Las Cruces.
Sure.
And if you take the count, like if you divide the state, and we're divided into districts in the state, in women's work and as well as 4-H contests. And of course, district contest in 4-H, that meant kids 9, 10, 11, and 12, which means they're juniors or novice now. We have both groups go. They go to district. And then your older kids go to state, but they all go to state. But in the other age level, all districts compete within a district. And so each county goes within that district and competes in the various judging or demonstrations or public speaking, and now they call it consumer decision making, where we used to call it home economics judging, which was different at that time and the like. And then, of course, I've trained home economics teams that if they won state back when Woolsworth was in existence, and they sponsored the trip to National 4-H Club Congress in Denver, and the Roundup, they call it the Western Roundup. All the states come in, and the livestock team and the home economics. We didn't compete, but they won the contest.
Wow, that's amazing.
And the livestock team, this county's had lots of kids go to in livestock judging and horse judging.
That's great.
And then they went to Denver and competed, and I kept things in the office, and I might say I compiled we had pictures of the kids that went to cruises from 1948 to in the 60s or better, when they quit taking them when we went to cruises, but all the kids in this I mean, when you see all the kids that went, Peggy had kids that went to all those contests, because Amistad was always very well represented with demonstrations and clothing and things, but yeah, and they competed in different ways, you know. And I said, we won home ec. Well, in fact, not too many years ago, this county had the top winning livestock team plus the horse team, and I have a granddaughter that was on the horse judging team. In fact, the Union County kids that year, they had one girl was first, Tessa was second, we had another kid third, and another kid fourth.
That's awesome.
And they won that judging and the like. And I said, you know, I mean, Union County people as a whole have been very extension minded. And they've been very active in 4-H. They've been very active in women's extension work. But there's all the difference between the north part and the south part.
So have you always lived in Clayton since you moved here in 48? Or did you move, did you live anywhere else?
My first husband passed away. Then later I remarried Jay Heimann, who lived in the Hayden area on a ranch. And I commuted back and forth for 7 or 8 years.
Okay.
And then when I retired, they put space between. They brought, at the time when I retired, they retired all the older agents, secretaries, and specialists.
Wow.
And so then they realized their knowledge people were gone.
Right.
And the secretary and I had worked together 37 years. She and I walked out when she said, when Wassa leaves, I leave.
Wow.
And so we walked out the door the same day.
Wow.
And so then they put 6 months between that, and they brought in a specialist that had shifted. She stayed a little better than a year, and that position reopened back in Mexico State, and so she moved back. Then they put some more space between, and they were saving money. And then my daughter, Owaissa, had worked in Lee County in the 4-H club program for 9 years. And so then she applied to come back here. And so she came back and worked over 20 some odd years. And yeah, it's, you know, it's, and of course, the disadvantage that Owaissa had was the fact that her home economist, her adult person, was not too prone to incorporate her into the adult program. And so then she had to learn a different, or combine. Because I worked as an individual, then I worked as that, and then I worked back and forth, and then finally we just became 2 agents, and that was it. And of course, she worked, the county agent had come in while I was here, because the county agent had retired. And so then he came in, but he was not as strong in 4-H and did not do things per se.
So, as someone who's lived in this county for as long as you have and has been around all the communities in this county, what do you think makes this county so special?
I'd say the people. You know, working with them, because as a whole, so many have worked along. I had lots of 4-H leaders with over 25 years of service. And a lot of the women have belonged accordingly. And actually, most 4-H families, it's a full-time program, and most of those parents don't participate in an adult section. But then when their kids are out of 4-H, then they may pick up the women's work and do within their community and do that kind of thing, particularly if they've been involved in 4-H. And otherwise, you know, and of course, again, 4-H is a complete program of its own. Women's program is a complete program on its own. And the specific things that are done every month, certain contests are held at certain times and what you've done. But, you know, we spend when teachers were out of school, our summer months are your busiest months as an agent, as a 4-H agent, because that is contest time.
Sure.
You have your county contest, and then you hope and train. And I never took a kid to any contest that if we had time between, that we did not try to improve on what they did.
Mm-hmm.
And it might be with their posters, it might be with their display, or whatever. And I had a specialist in the state office tell me one time, she could tell what girls came from Union County by what they did.
That's great.
Because we always had a final display and it was always, you learn.
Yeah.
I mean, I learned and observed, and you just keep learning. I
Sure.
mean, it's a never-ending educational program, because like with 4-H, the projects change, requirements change,
Mm-hmm.
and you teach your people accordingly. You know, it's just one of those, I don't know, it's an educational deal. And
Yeah.
yes, I joined when I retired. I joined the Amistad Club. But then we did not have 4 clubs. We had 1 club.
Mm-hmm.
Because Hayden went by. And again, some clubs, it was like, I'm going to say this, you know, when they were used to having an agent every month.
Mm-hmm.
And when I could meet them every month, and then older ones, I know particularly like the Hayden Club, and the the younger ones that belonged to that, they moved to Centerville Club, I'll say, or they had Old Rosebud Club.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, Old Rosebud Club was a part of Hardin County.
Right.
And I also got some comment from some of those, and North and other places. If you're not going to meet with us, we're not going to belong. Well, that time had ended.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, to make it all work, things had, we had to change. So like I say, and I'm sure I don't know what she did, because what I'm saying is that we made it, my leaders, 4-H and women's clubs, made the decision how I balance 4-H and home economics. And I know one time I had some ladies that came in that come from other places, and I tried to tell them I was probably one of the few agents in the state that met their women's clubs.
Mm-hmm.
And that is honest the truth.
Wow.
And I know one time the deal, and they said, well, you spend more time doing 4-H than you do women. Well, all agents have to do a report. You keep track of how many hours you work in this and how many hours you work in that, because you're not 8 to 5, I can assure you.
Right.
No, you have lots of night work, and you even have Sunday.
Right.
I kept some things off of Sunday.
Right.
I didn't allow it, but it's there now. But anyway, you just have to make a balance.
Mm-hmm.
And I know at that particular time, when I got that, I called in my women's clubs and 4-H clubs again. And I presented how I spent my time, because I'm going to say, like, in June, okay, that's contest time, I'm at 4-H clubs, because we did dress reviews. At one time we had over 100 kids that sewed. And then not some big in some areas, but it was.
A lot of, yeah.
It was a lot of kids. There were a lot of girls. And I said, you had to make it work and to do. But at the same time in June, I went to Cruces
Mm-hmm.
when we had the Women's Extension State meeting, and at one time New Mexico State did what we called Homemakers College. So they made their state meeting, and then we spent the rest of the week on educational programs, because all the specialists and the like did trainings in clothing or foods or whatever it was. And so we left on Sunday and we got home on Saturday. So I had a whole full week of women's work in June to go with it.
Wow.
So when I actually got through, I had actually more hours than adults.
I would
imagine. 4-H. Because they didn't realize, just because 4-H, June was 4-H month, that I didn't. You never had a month that you didn't do both programs.
Right.
Actually, even though you were doing
Focusing
either
on-
meeting adult clubs and training 4-H leaders, or vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
But you still had to get ready for that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I have a few minutes left,
Okay.
and I want to ask, one of the questions I like to ask at the end is your advice for the future generations of farmers and ranchers. What is your advice for the kids kind of growing up now?
I really hope, because, of course, I'm home ec.
Yeah, that's fine.
I really hope that we get back an agent
Mhm.
that does extension home economics, and that they continue in 4-H and the kids, because we no longer have a home economics program
Mhm.
in the school. They still have the ag program, but they take them, of course, they're in a higher end school.
Mhm.
And actually, they get a lot of training from 10 till they reach high school. And I just hope that they could, that we don't lose it, because 4-H is, and even Women's Club, it's a valuable, it's not only educational, but it's social.
Sure.
And some people at that time, back in the early days, probably that social time was one of the few times that,
Yeah.
that rural women
Yeah.
could get together and do, because they traveled by horse or buggy.
Yeah.
I didn't, but
Mm-hmm.
and then I just think it's a program that, but again, it depends a lot on what county commissioners put up money to keep the program in the county.
Right.
Because we tried to convince them to keep the home economics program and keep the program assistant that we had and leave her in ag
Mm-hmm.
and pick up the other, but that didn't happen.
Okay.
And to me, it's a sad thing.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything I left out or anything else you'd like to say?
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, thank you for talking to me today. I really appreciate
Well, I know
it.
I'll get wound up, but
No.
I really, it's that's all I've done all my life.
Yeah. No, it's great. Thank you. I'm gonna share.
And Peggy knows.